Good afternoon, class. Our topic for today is stroke and cerebrovascular diseases that will focus on ischemic stroke. So this is the outline of our discussion. Okay. So stroke in general is a relatively sudden occurrence of a focal neurologic deficit of vascular origin. There are all gradation of severity, but in all forms of stroke, the essential feature is the abruptness with the neurological deficit. Usually, it occurs in a matter of seconds that stamps the disorder as vascular. So this is the most common neurological disorder in adults requiring emergency intervention. There are two types of stroke. We have ischemic stroke and hemorrhagic stroke. Stroke assume importance both because of its high mortality and the residual disability that it causes. Stroke after heart disease, cancer, and accident is among the most common cause of death in worldwide. But in local studies, stroke is the second leading cause of mortality in the Philippines and third leading cause of death worldwide, with a prevalence rate of 0.9%. And among the common type of stroke, ischemic stroke accounts for 70% of all stroke cases, whereas hemorrhagic stroke accounts for 30% of all cases. This is an important major public importance in the several modifiable factors known to increase the liability to stroke. The most important of these are hypertension, atrial fibrillation, diabetes mellitus, cigarette smoking, and hyperlipidemia. Hypertension is also the most readily recognizable factor in the genesis of primary intracerebral hemorrhage. And it appears that the stroke-producing potential of hypertension is as much the product of heightened systolic blood pressure as of diastolic pressure. Structural cardiac disease also imparts a risk of stroke, and when combined with atrial fibrillation, as was common in the past, like your rheumatic valvular disease, the stroke risk increased to 18-fold over the general population. Diabetes mellitus hasten the atherosclerotic process in both large and small arteries. The importance of long-duration cigarette smoking in the development of carotid occlusion or carotid atherosclerosis, the interaction between the diabetes and hypertension on the one hand and intracerebral hemorrhage, as well as atherothrombotic infarction on the other hand, as well as association of other cardiac diseases and cerebral embolism are considered further on this chapter. Okay, so the level of your low density lipoprotein cholesterol has the most impact on the incidence of stroke, but elevated triglycerides also confer a risk. Well, one study they implicated a polymorphism on chromosome 12 encompassing several genes that have a putative connection to vascular disease, and that is your chromosome 12. So let's now proceed with ischemic stroke. So there are different causes of ischemic stroke that stand out. First is the atherosclerotic, which produces local occlusive process. Next is cerebral embolism. It is caused by obstruction by material originating from the distal source. And last is decreased perfusion, okay, in the setting of a general circulatory problem. So your cerebral embolism is the most common cause of ischemic stroke, and of all type of stroke, this mechanism develops most rapidly like a bolt out of the blue. As a rule, a full-blown picture evolves within seconds, exemplifying the idealized temporal profile of stroke. Although the abruptness with which the stroke develops and the lack of prodromal symptoms point strongly to embolism, diagnosis is based on the total clinical circumstances. And this mechanism is common among younger population. In most cases, the embolic material consists of fragments that has broken away from a thrombus within the heart or independently from the endocardial surface of a cardiac chamber or valve. Other main components of your embolism is your donor source, embolic material, and recipient artery. Well, these are the different sources of your embolus. It could be coming from the heart, okay, from a cardiac mural thrombus, and it could also originate from the heart valve, okay, or a vegetation that forms in your heart valve, in the aortic plaque, that is lodged to your brain, and emboli from a carotid plaque. Okay. So, somewhat less frequently, the source is intraarterial. Okay, that's what you call your artery to artery. Okay, where your distal end of the thrombus within the lumen of an occluded severely stenotic carotid or vertebral artery clots that originates in the systemic venous system and passes through an aperture in the heart walls. Okay. Other systemic sources like your fat, tumor cells, fibrocartilage, amniotic fluid, and air. Well, according to Framingham Heart Study, patients with chronic atrial fibrillation are approximately 6 times more liable to stroke than an age-matched population with a normal cardiac rhythm. And this risk varies with age. For people aged less than 65 years old, the risk is around 1%. And as you go older, around 75 years old, the risk, okay, increases to 8% per year. Embolism may occur also in cases of paroxysmal atrial fibrillation or flutter, and various studies have suggested that the risks of stroke is even higher in this condition than in patients with chronic atrial fibrillation. Well, scoring system um, have been developed. This is to gauge the future likelihood of stroke from atrial fibrillation. We have the CHADS2 and related system are shorthand methods to quantitate the risk factor that modulates the risk for stroke in a patient with atrial fibrillation with no valvular diseases. Okay, so this CHADS2 has been refined to a newer system, your CHADS2 VAS. Okay, this grading system. This is to improve the prediction, but the confidence interval around the point estimates of predictive values in both scales are considerable, and clinical judgment must be exercised in their use. So the goal of this system is to make choices regarding the warfarin or similar anticoagulation for the prevention of embolic stroke from arrhythmias, and to identify patients who have such a low risk of stroke that the risk of anticoagulation may not be justified. Okay, so you give points assigned for each item, and this, and on the right side, this is the predicted yearly stroke risk. Okay. Well, sick sinus syndrome or sinus node dysfunction this is in 2.9% of men and 1.5% of women aged more than 75, and the risk for embolism in this particular case is 18%. So for valvular heart disease, 1/5 to 1/10 of all patients with cardiac valve disease, for example, is your mitral valve prolapse. Okay, so this is considered as a common source of your emboli, especially in young patients. Okay, so the disease valve usually causes turbulent flow that causes platelet activation that results to clot formation. So rheumatic valve, mitral valve stenosis, this is this has a strongest association to form a thrombus ball within your atrial chamber. Okay, these are other sources of your emboli in the coronary artery disease, in patient with arrhythmia, in patient with valvular heart disease, in the setting of cardiomyopathies, intracardiac lesion, and septal abnormalities. So in the setting of infective endocarditis, the vegetation of both infective and non-infective can give rise to several different lesions in the brain. So the mural thrombus deposited on the damaged endocardium overlying a myocardial infarct in the left ventricle, particularly in the aneurysmal sac. So this is an important source of your cerebral emboli, where you can use your TCD to monitor microembolic signals. Your TCD means your transcranial Doppler ultrasound. Okay, so this detects microembolic signals even after the completion of antibiotic therapy. And the most common microorganism found in this condition is your Staphylococcus aureus. Another source of embolism is the carotid or vertebral artery, where clot forms on the ulcerated atheromatous plaque that may be detached and carried to an intracranial branch. So this is your artery-to-artery embolism. So other etiologies could be due to arterial dissection, inflammatory condition, aneurysm, and fibromuscular dysplasia. For migrating embolus syndrome, this is most evident in the cases of posterior cerebral artery occlusion, either from a cardiogenic source or from a thrombus in the proximal vertebral artery. So the symptoms are caused by an embolus that traverses through these vessels and seen in posterior cerebral artery occlusion. Okay, so the most common symptoms are dizziness, vertigo, diplopia, dysarthria prior to hemianopia. For paradoxical embolism, this occurs when an abnormal communication exists between the right and left side of the heart, particularly patent foramen ovale, okay? Or the embolic material arises from the venous system. Okay, so sometimes embolic material may arise in the veins of the lower extremity or in the pelvis, okay, or elsewhere in the systemic circulation, bypassing the pulmonary circulation and reaches the cerebral vessels. Pulmonary hypertension, okay, favors the occurrence of paradoxical embolism, but these strokes occur even in the absence of pulmonary hypertension. So another mechanism is your atherothrombosis or atherosclerosis. This is usual underlying pathology for local vascular thrombosis. So the evolution of clinical phenomena in cerebral thrombosis, both of large intracranial, no? This includes your basilar and your carotid, or extracranial, including your carotid and vertebral, and small vessels is more variable than of the embolism and hemorrhage. So some patient with atherothrombosis, the stroke is preceded by minor signs or one or more transient attacks of focal neurologic dysfunction, like your TIAs. Okay, so these prodromal episodes may herald the oncoming vascular event caused by your atherothrombotic stroke. Okay, so the thrombotic stroke, which represents a very low blood flow and related phenomenon, develops in one of the several ways. There may be a single episode, but typically the whole stroke evolves over a few minutes or hours. The characteristic is stuttering or intermittent progression of neurologic deficit. So the plaques, okay, atheromatous plaques preferentially form at the branching points and curves of the cerebral artery. So the most common site is in the internal carotid artery. Second is the vertebral artery. Third is the middle cerebral artery. Okay. Fourth is the posterior cerebral artery at the P2 segment. And last is the anterior cerebral artery at the callosal segment. Well, atherothrombosis may cause cerebral infarction in several ways. The most obvious is an occlusive plaque or a thrombus form on a plaque occupies the lumen of the major intracerebral vessels, such as the middle cerebral artery, and the blood flow will stop to the areas of the brain supplied by the vessel. A variation of this mechanism is one of the occlusion by atherosclerosis of more proximal vessels, such as your distal carotid artery. Okay. So this may lead to infarction of the territory between major branches of the ICA that are most susceptible to reduced blood flow. For example, if that is the border zone or the end arterial, or less accurately termed as your watershed infarction, depending on the richness of the collateral vessels. Atherothrombotic lesion in the proximal vessel may serve as a nidus for the formation of an embolus that may manifest itself as a stroke in one of the territories of the vessels. So that's what you call your artery-to-artery embolism. So here is an image, so you can appreciate here a thrombus formation in your common carotid artery. Okay, so as a thrombus is completely occluded the lumen. Okay, so this results to an infarction, no, in the areas that's supplied by your internal carotid artery, which is your MCA and your ACA. So the likely causes of TIA are reduced blood flow, no? Or embolic particles. So that's the mechanism for TIA. So it has become clear that many instances of a single transient attacks have an embolic mechanism. In contrast to repetitive TIAs, no, repeatedly producing the same or similar clinical syndrome are in most cases related to a vascular stenosis or a reduced blood flow to a limited region of the brain. Okay? And this can involve any cerebral arteries. Okay? It is also the case that a single TIA can result from a vascular stenosis, and of course, on the occurrence of the first TIA, it is generally not possible to determine the source. Okay, so it is important to identify if it's a single transient or a uniform and repeated TIAs. So we have a scoring system, no? So your ABCD score, ABCD2 score. So this is scoring system has been developed as a clinical decision, okay, that to assess, no, the risk of stroke in a patient who suffered from TIA. Okay, so as to fast track that those patients who are at high risk for urgent treatment. Okay, so the ABCD2 score allocates points for key clinical and vascular risk variables and has achieved particular prominence among several clinical risk prediction scores. Anyway, the component of your ABCD2, A for age, B for blood pressure, D for duration of symptoms, and the presence of diabetes mellitus. So you give 1 point each if the patient has the following characteristic. So these are the different risk, stroke risk, no? Do 2-day risk, 7-day risk, and 90-day risk. Okay. And of course, the higher the score, the higher the risk of developing a full-blown stroke. So in transient ischemic attack of the eye, no, or your transient monocular blindness, or your amaurosis fugax, no, this is the most of the visual episode evolves swiftly over 5 to 30 seconds and described as a horizontal shade falling smoothly over the visual field until the eye is completely but painlessly blind. Okay, so the implication of your amaurosis fugax have been evaluated by several investigators and found that not to be as ominous, no, as those patients with hemispherical TIAs. Okay, So ophthalmoscopic findings, no, of the retinal vessels will show, no, in patient with TIA shows a boxcar pattern or a scattered bits of white material temporarily blocking the retinal arteries. So the likely cause of TIA, okay, or reduced blood flow or embolic particles, it has become clear that many instances of a single transient attacks, no, as I mentioned earlier, have an embolic embolism. Okay, so repetitive TIAs usually from a vascular stenosis or atherothrombosis. Okay, so the clinical symptoms appears in 95%, okay, obstruction. Okay, other mechanism could be stenosis, no, especially in orthostatic position. Hyperventilation, usually you produce TIAs in condition like moya-moya disease. For the pathophysiology of your ischemia, your cerebral infarction basically comprised of two pathophysiologic process. No? One is loss of supply of oxygen and glucose secondary to vascular occlusion. Okay? So the brain utilizes a glucose of 75 to 100 milligram per minute and oxygen of 500 ml per minute. Okay? So our brain, since it is a small organ, it requires a constant supply of ATP, you know, to maintain neuronal and membrane integrity. So the phenomenon of cerebrovascular autoregulation is approximately introduced in this paragraph. Okay, and this has been already discussed in the vascular system, cerebrovascular system. So over a range of mean blood pressure, approximately 50 to 150 millimeter mercury, so the small PL vessels are able to dilate and constrict in order to maintain cerebral blood flow. So that is your autoregulation in between that level. So this accommodation eventually fails at the extreme blood pressure, less than 50 or more than 150. Okay? It is also important to take note that the normal cerebral blood flow is around 15 ml per 100 grams of brain tissue per minute. So the survival of your ischemic tissue depends on the intensity and the duration of ischemia and the availability of the collateral blood flow. Okay? So if you have a 20 ml per 100 gram per minute, there can be an EEG changes. No? There can be a problem in the cellular level that can be detected by your EEG. If the blood flow is around 10 ml per 100 gram per minute, you know, so there is a membrane dysfunction and a blood flow of less than 5 milligram per 100 gram per minute, you know, this may result to a cell death. So these are the changes in the ischemic neuron. You can have an increased extracellular potassium, increased intracellular calcium, and cellular acidosis, invariably leading to histologic signs of necrosis. Well, you can have also free fatty acids that are activated and destroyed the phospholipids of neuronal membrane, no? Several prostaglandin, leukotrienes, okay, and free radical accumulates and intracellular proteins and enzymes are denatured in the setting of ischemia. There's also release of excitatory neurotransmitters such as glutamate, aspartate, and urationic acid. So once you have a ischemic neuron, this eventually causes the cell to swell, no, to become swollen, no, and it's what you call your cellular or cytotoxic edema. So this is a pathophysiology of your infarction, a simple diagram which shows, no, in the setting of infarction, can have a decreased oxygen and glucose level that result to a decreased ATP. This will in turn Okay. Result to a failure of your sodium-potassium ATPase pump, resulting to accumulation of your intracellular calcium, and will further it will result to neurotoxicity and accumulation of calcium and sodium intracellularly via activation of your glutamate receptors, like your AMPA and your NMDA, and activation of your several lipid peroxidases and free radicals, and result to accumulation of your hydrogen and potassium in the glial cells. So this cascade of event will result to cellular swelling, leading to neuronal cell death. In the setting of a cerebral infarction, we have different regions of ischemia. You have the infarcted core, okay, where you have the lowest blood flow and the most severe ischemic damage. The cells in that area, usually they have a blood flow of 0 to 10. And we have the ischemic penumbra, where the cells here are still viable, okay, dysfunctional but not dead, and they are physiologically stunned. Okay, the blood flow around that area is 10 to 20 ml per minute. Okay. So of the goal of treatment of acute ischemic stroke is to salvage this penumbra, is to prevent death within this area. So the effect of a focal arterial occlusion on the brain vary depending on the location of the occlusion and on the available collateral and anastomotic channels. Okay. So in the occlusion of your internal carotid artery in the neck, there may be an anastomotic flow through the anterior and the posterior communicating artery of the circle of Willis from the from the external carotid artery through your ophthalmic artery. Okay? If you have a blockage within the vertebral artery, the anastomotic flow may be via the deep cervical, thyrocervical, and occipital arteries, or retrograde from the other vertebral artery, and again through your posterior communicating artery. Okay? If the occlusion is in the main stem portion of one of the cerebral arteries that is distal to the circle of Willis, a series of meningeal interarterial anastomosis may carry sufficient blood into the compromised territory to lessen the ischemic damage. And if you have a persistent trigeminal artery, this connects your ICA and your basilar artery. So the arrangement of the major arteries on the right side carrying the blood from the heart to the brain. Okay, this also shows the different collateral vessels that may modify the effect of the cerebral ischemia. Okay, for example, your posterior communicating artery connects the internal carotid and the posterior communicating artery, and this provides anastomosis between the carotid and the basilar system. Over the convexity, okay, of your brain, the subarachnoid interarterial anastomosis. So this links the middle, anterior, and the posterior cerebral arteries, which is shown in this image. So anastomosis that are more continuous network of tiny arteries forming a border zone between the major cerebral arteries. Okay, and sometimes again, persistent trigeminal artery, the image B, connects the internal carotid and the basilar artery. Okay, the proximal artery of the circle of Willis. Okay, in anastomosis between the internal and external carotid arteries via the orbit. Okay, and this area. Okay, and the extracranial anastomosis from the muscular branch of the cervical arteries. This image from the muscular of the cervical arteries to the vertebral and the external carotid arteries are inset. Okay, so you can have deep cervical and thyrocervical arteries. Let's now proceed with the imaging modalities. So in the setting of acute ischemic stroke, we can request for a CT scan, an MRI, an arteriography, a Doppler flow studies, and a perfusion scanning. Okay, so CT scan abnormalities in patient with acute ischemic stroke. Okay, you can appreciate the following. You can have obscuring of the basal ganglia density, loss of definition of the insular cortex, sulcal effacement. This signifies swelling, hypodensity within the infarcted zone, hyperdense within the infarcted zone, hyperdense arteries indicating thrombosis, calcific emboli within the arteries. Let's now proceed with the computed tomography in ischemic stroke. So you can request for a non-contrast CT of the brain, which is remain a mainstay of imaging in acute setting of acute stroke, especially if the patient is a candidate for thrombolysis. So your CT scan demonstrates, okay, and accurately localizes even a small hemorrhage. No? However, this is the in the setting of a hyperacute, no? Meaning a stroke within a few hours, you cannot appreciate an infarct, okay? But you can appreciate an early features of ischemia, okay? So the goal of CT scan in acute setting is to exclude intracranial hemorrhage, which would preclude thrombolysis, look for early features of ischemia, so exclude other causes of intracranial pathologies that may mimic a stroke, okay, such as tumor. Okay. So in this image, you can appreciate, okay, a hyperdense MCA sign on your left. Okay. So we signify a thrombosis within your left MCA. So you can appreciate a sulcal effacement if you compare it on the right side of the brain. So that the sulci here are effaced, okay? And if you repeat the scan the following day, you can appreciate hypodensity over this area. So you can have obliteration of your basal ganglia, okay? So here you can appreciate the caudate putamen and globus pallidus. Here, they're gone, no? Probably we're dealing with a stroke in this area. Here you can appreciate this is a CT scan of a patient with a left-sided weakness. Okay, you can appreciate here a hypodensity over this area as you compare it in this. And if you compare it in the left side of the brain, this is more dark. No. Let's now proceed with the magnetic resonance imaging or MRI. So this demonstrates a flow void in vessels, hemosiderin and iron pigment, and alteration resulting from ischemic necrosis and gliosis. So MRI is particularly advantageous in demonstrating a small lacunar lesion deep in the hemispheres and abnormalities or infarcts within your brainstem and your cerebellum, because infarcts in your posterior circulation, no, is poorly illustrated, no, demonstrated in your CT scan. So the most important sequence that you need to request is your diffusion weighted imaging. Okay, this is very sensitive for detection of acute brain infarct, even within minutes to hours. Okay, so infarcted areas are shown as bright in the WI and dark on the apparent diffusion coefficient or ADC images. Okay, so here you can see, no, a hyperdensity, no, hyperintensity over the right cerebellum in your DWI. As you can see, there's an corresponding signal drop in your ADC map. Okay. So here, this is a DWI MRI showing you an infarct, no, within your bilateral ACA no? And you have a corresponding ACA distribution, and there's a corresponding signal drop on your ADC. Okay. So if you look in the succeeding sequences, okay, you can see here most likely we're dealing with the anterior cerebral artery occlusion, okay, because it involves the medial part of your cerebral hemisphere, bilateral, okay. Well, your arteriography, enhanced by the digital processing of image, accurately demonstrates stenosis and occlusion of the intracranial and extracranial vessels, as well as aneurysms, vascular malformation, and other blood vessel diseases such as arteritis and vasospasm. So there are different types of arteriography. You can have DSA, digital subtraction angiography. You have magnetic resonance angiography. Well, if you want to delineate the veins of your brain, you can request for magnetic resonance spinography, no, and CT angiography. So for magnetic resonance angiography, these techniques have the advantage of relatively safe. Okay, so you don't need injection of contrast media like your CT angiography, but it doesn't give refined image of the smaller blood vessels. So your MRA depicts the time of flight of blood through vessels and is not as accurate as your CT angiography in measuring the degree and the morphology of changes within the cerebral or the intracranial vessels. So this is a normal MRA, no, of a patient. No, you can appreciate the carotid arteries here. So this is the the carotid artery, the vertebral artery, and the basilar artery. Okay. So you can also request for venography, no? So this will demonstrate the different veins in your brain. You can appreciate here the superior sagittal sinus, the transverse sinus, okay, the straight sinus. So this is an MRV of a patient. Okay. So your CT angiography is a diagnostic test that uses an X-ray. It produces a cerebral angiogram or an image that will help you to look for any stenosis or other abnormalities within your cerebral vessels, within the head and the neck. So this is more invasive because it requires contrast media, like compared to your MRA. But the resolution, of even smaller vessels are very clear in this particular imaging. And you can also appreciate lateral vessels. Perfusion scanning, this is a time intensity curve. Okay. So this is generated by the measurement of the passage of contrast material through your brain tissue. The slope of the curve represents blood flow, and the area under the curve represents the blood volume. So the voxel measurement of these parameters are converted to color maps showing blood flow, volume, and the contrast transit time throughout the brain. So any arterial occlusion alters the time intensity curve by either flattening the slope of the curve or reducing the area under the curve. So let's now proceed with the different syndromes of ischemic stroke. Okay. So, well, most of the ischemic stroke, they have a typical syndrome that can be assigned in the occlusion of each of the major cerebral vessels. So the identification of these syndromes by careful examination is one of the cardinal skills of the clinical neurologist. That's why according to Kaplan, no, if you want to learn neurology, you have to learn it stroke by stroke. So there are three major categories in your carotid artery syndrome. You have the common carotid artery, okay, that will give rise to your internal carotid and your external carotid artery. So the right common carotid artery arises at the level of the sternoclavicular notch from the innominate or the brachiocephalic artery. The left common carotid artery arises directly from the aortic arch. So the common carotid artery ascends through the neck, no, to the C4 level, just below the angle of the jaw, where it divides into your external and your internal carotid artery. So it consists of around 1% of cases of carotid artery syndrome. Okay, it can be occluded by atheromatous plaques at its origin or an occlusion in the midpoint. Okay, so it is important to know the different part of your internal carotid artery. You have the cervical part, no, the first part, no. So the territory affected is highly dependent on the circle of activities. Usually transient monocular blindness in 10 to 25%, other signs such as retinal atrophy, iridial atrophy, and claudication of the jaw. It's important to know that the first branch of your internal carotid artery is your ophthalmic artery. That's why most of the symptoms, no, is related to the related to vision. So this is a diagram of one of the cerebral hemisphere at the coronal section, showing you different regions of blood supply of the brain. You know? So the medial part is supplied by your anterior cerebral artery, and your lateral part is supplied by your middle cerebral artery. Posterior cerebral artery is supplied, or the posterior sum of the circulation in the posterior circulation supply your temporal lobe. So for bilateral internal carotid artery occlusion, this is the earlier occlusion of once the ICA and subsequently occlusion of the other side. You know? So symptoms usually, the signs are usually the patient may suffer from a coma, quadriplegia, continuous horizontal metronomic conjugate eye movement. So patients with such large infarction are usually immediately drowsy or stuporous because of an ill-defined effect of the reticular activating system. Okay, patient may also have a contralateral hemiplegia if it occludes one side of the carotid artery, hemihypoesthesia, and aphasia if it involves the left ICA. So let's now proceed with the middle cerebral artery occlusion. So these are the different branches. We have the lateral and inferior frontal lobe, parietal lobe, superior temporal lobe, and the insula. And the lenticular striate innervates, okay, or supplies the putamen, the caudate nucleus, the outer globus pallidus, the posterior limb of the internal capsule, as well as your corona radiata. So this is a diagram of your left cerebral hemisphere at the lateral aspect, showing the courses of the MCA and its branches and its principal regions of the cerebral localization. So remember that the clinical manifestation of the infarction in the territory usually corresponds to the regions of the cerebral damage. Take note also that your motor and sensory homunculus, that the lateral aspect of the brain, no, is represented by your mouth, lips, and your upper extremity, whereas the medial aspect of your cerebral hemisphere corresponds to the lower extremity. So the MCA has four parts. You have the proximal MCA, or the horizontal part, and you have the insular part, which is located in the insula, and you have the opercular part, okay, and the cortical region. Okay. So the M1 usually give rise to the lateral lenticulostriate arteries, or the penetrating arteries. So MCA may be occluded in its longitudinal portion, or the stem, that is proximal to the bifurcation. So this is what you call your M1 occlusion. So an occlusion at this site, okay, blocks the flow in the small, deep penetrating vessels, as well as in the superficial cortical branches. So an occlusion in the distal part or the distal end of the stem blocks only the orifice of the division of the artery. So patient may suffer from contralateral hemiplegia, hemianesthesia, homonymous visual field defect, global aphasia if it involves the dominant hemisphere. Patient may also have anosognosia and amorphosynthesis, if it involves the right hemisphere. So cortical signs may be mild or absent or adequate if there is an adequate collateral supply, and usually M1 occlusion is embolic in origin. Okay. So let's now proceed with the steatocapsular infarction. So this is an infarction that involves your lenticulus striate, specifically your lateral lenticulus striate, which is a branch of your M1. This is larger than a typical lacunar infarction and gives you a coma-shaped infarction. So it occurs in a deep lesion in the territory of the penetrating vessels of the MCA, collectively known as your lenticulus striate. Let's now proceed with the superior division of your MCA occlusion. The clinical syndrome may be a dense brachiofacial sensory motor deficit, ipsilateral deviation of the head and eyes, no impairment of alertness, and if it involves your left hemisphere, it may manifest with Broca's aphasia. Okay, so an embolus entering the MCA artery most often lodges in one of its two main branches. So the superior division, usually supplying the Rolandic and the pre-Rolandic areas, or the inferior division that supplies your lateral temporal and your inferior parietal lobe. Okay. Let's now proceed with the distal superior MCA division. Okay, so if it involves the ascending frontal branch or the pre-Rolandic, patient may manifest with brachiocephalic hemipharesis and Broca's aphasia if it involves your left hemisphere. For Rolandic branch, patient might suffer from sensory motor paresis, brachial monoplegia, and severe dysarthria. If it involves your ascending parietal branch, patient may have a conduction aphasia or idiomotor apraxia. So for inferior MCA division occlusion, this is less frequently than your superior division occlusion, and usually the mechanism is embolic in origin. If it involves the left hemisphere, patient may suffer from Roux aphasia, superior quadrantanopia, or homonymous hemianopia, visual neglect. Okay, so occlusion of the inferior division of your MCA is slightly less frequent than occlusion of the superior one. Okay. So let's now proceed with the ACA, or anterior cerebral artery occlusion. So this supplies anterior 3/4 of the medial surface of the frontal lobe. And usually the mechanism is occlusion. The mechanism of occlusion is embolic in origin. So remember that your ACA, through its cortical branches, supplies the anterior 2/3, And this includes the medial front orbital surface, the frontal pole, and the strip of the lateral surface of the cerebral hemisphere along its superior border, and the anterior 4/5 of your corpus callosum. So you have different parts of your ACA. The proximal part is your precallosal or a pre-communicating artery, or the horizontal. This originates from the terminal bifurcation of the ICA, and terminates into your anterior communicating artery. And you have the second part, which is the infracallosal, which is the post-communicating, originating at the ACOM, extending to the lamina terminalis and along the rostrum of your corpus callosum, and terminates either at the genu of the corpus callosum or at the origin of the callosomarginal artery. And the third part is a precallosal segment, which extends at the genu of the corpus callosum or the distal of to the origin of your callosum marginal artery, and it terminates where the artery turns directly posterior above the corpus callosum. The fourth part is your supracallosal, and it is located above the body of your um, corpus callosum anterior to the plane of the coronal suture. And you have the postcallosal segment. This is above the corpus callosum posterior to the plane of the coronal suture. So patient with A1 segment occlusion, this is usually well tolerated because there's a collateral flow via your anterior communicating artery. Patient may suffer from paraplegia, incontinence, abulia, non-affluent aphasia, and frontal lobe personality changes. Okay? So occlusion distal to the anterior communicating, patient may have a motor deficit of the contralateral extremities, mild sensory deficit, urinary incontinence, contralateral grasp reflex, and paratonic rigidity, sympathetic apraxia, alien hand syndrome, if it involves your non-dominant hemisphere, and a transcortical motor aphasia. So your recurrent artery of Hübner, okay, so this supplies the anterior limb of your internal capsule, and it also includes your head of the caudate nucleus. This is the most common affected meningovascular vessels in patient with syphilis. So the clinical picture, patient may have hemiparesis, dysarthria, abulia, agitation, and hyperactivity, and aphasia in the form of transcortical motor aphasia. Okay, so these are the recurrent artery of Hübner. If you have bilateral caudate infarction, okay, so patient may suffer from inattentiveness, abulia, forgetfulness, agitation, and psychosis. So for anterior choroidal artery, so remember your anterior choroidal artery, this is a branch of your ICA. So this is a long, narrow artery that springs from the internal carotid artery, just distal to the origin of the posterior communicating artery. So it supplies the internal segment of the globus pallidus, the posterior limb of the internal capsule, where your corticospinal tract passes, okay, and several contiguous structures, including your optic tract and your choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle. So the clinical picture of an anterior choroidal artery occlusion, since it affects the corticospinal tract, you can have a contralateral hemiplegia, hemianesthesia, and homonymous sectorial hemianopia. Let's now proceed with the posterior cerebral artery stroke. So approximately 70% of individuals with this occlusion, okay, both posterior cerebral arteries, okay, are formed by the bifurcation of the basilar artery, okay, and 20 to 25%, okay, one posterior cerebral artery arises from the basilar artery in the unusual way. No? So it supplies the inferior temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, the brainstem, as well as the diencephalon. And the mechanism, the stroke mechanism is usually embolism. So we have the four different parts of your posterior communicating artery. So the P1 segment arises from the terminus of the basilar artery, proximal to the ostium of the posterior communicating artery. Okay. So within that, you can appreciate interpeduncular branches, which arise above the basilar bifurcation, supplying the red nuclei as well as the substantia nigra bilaterally, and the medial parts of the cerebral peduncles. And it also supplies your oculomotor and trochlear nuclei and nerves. Okay. You also have the thalamoperforate branches. It supplies the inferior, medial, and the anterior parts of the thalamus. Next is the posterior post-communicating segment. Okay. Under this segment, it gives rise to the thalamo-geniculate branches. Okay, so it supplies the geniculate body and the central and the posterior part of the thalamus, the quadrigeminal segment. Okay, and last is your cortical segment. So the cortical branches of your PCA supplies the inferomedial part of the temporal lobe and the medial occipital lobe, including the lingula, the cuneus, the precuneus, and the Brodmann's area 17, 18, and 19. So again, this is an image showing you that the parts of your PCA and its branches. Okay. So this is the two thalamus. Okay. So this is your internal carotid artery and your posterior communicating artery, this area. So you have the basilar artery. This is the basilar artery. Okay. And you have the thalamogenic artery, number 4. It supplies the thalamus, and the tuberothalamic artery. This is also a branch of your posterior cerebral artery. And your number 8 is your posterior cerebral artery. Okay. And this is also number 6 here is your posterior choroidal artery. Okay. Arises from the posterior cerebral artery. So in your posterior cerebral artery, you can have proximal PCA occlusion, cortical PCA occlusion, and bilateral PCA occlusion. So for proximal PCA occlusion, okay, this is a thalamic syndrome of Dejerine and Rossi. Okay, this follows infarction of the sensory relay nuclei in the thalamus, results of occlusion of your thalamogenic branches. Occlusion of small vessels supplying these territories from in situ atherothrombosis or embolic occlusions of the posterior cerebral artery is the common cause. So the clinical picture, you can have deep hemisensory loss, transient hemiparesis, homonymous hemianopia, thalamic pain, thalamic hand. So for proximal PCA occlusion, so it involves your central midbrain and your subthalamic syndrome. So sometimes there's an occlusion of your artery of Percheron, which supplies both of your thalamus. It can arise in both or either of the two PCA. So the clinical picture, since it involves the subthalamic nucleus, patient may have stupor or coma because of the involvement of the reticular activating system, and patient may have vertical gaze palsy. So for proximal PCA syndrome, so there's an involvement of anteromedial inferior thalamic syndrome or occlusion of the thalamic perforating branches. So the clinical picture is hemivarismus, deep sensory loss, hemiataxia, and tremor. So artery of Percheron. So antero-inferior thalamic syndrome. Okay. This has been mentioned in the previous slide. Okay. Well, for the posterior circulation involving your basilar artery, vertebral artery, so these are the different intramedullary brainstem syndrome. So these are the eponym and the involved site, okay, and the different cranial nerves involved. Okay. So remember, in cranial nerves involvement, the cranial nerve involvement is always ipsilateral, whereas your long tract signs, such as your motor and sensory, are always contralateral to the side of the lesion. Okay? So for cortical PCA syndrome, you can have occlusion of branches to the temporal and occipital lobes. Okay? So the clinical picture of cortical PCA is homonymous hemianopia with macular sparring, alexia without agraphia, anomia, and visual agnosia. for vertebral artery stroke, okay, the chief arteries, these are the vertebral artery, these are the chief arteries of your medulla. So it supplies the lower three-fourths of your pyramid, your medial lemniscus, retroolivary region, restiform body, and your posterior-inferior part of the cerebellar hemisphere. So remember that your vertebral artery, has four parts. So your V1 or your preforaminal segment originates to the first entry of the first cervical transverse foramen, usually at the C6. Okay, and the V2 is your foraminal segment from the transverse foramen to the uppermost foramen, usually at the C1. And your V3 is your Atlantic extradural or extraspinal segment. This site, usually it originates from the site to the dural penetration at the foramen magnum. And your V4 is your intradural or intracranial segment, usually originates or arises from the dural entry to the junction with the opposite vertebral artery and the origin of the basilar artery. So lateral medullary syndrome, or what you call your Wallenberg syndrome, this is an occlusion of the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. Okay? So ito yung pinakamaraming symptoms, no? So you can have vestibular nuclear involvement. Okay? Patient may have vertigo, nystagmus, or oscillopsia. You can have involvement of your spinothalamic tract. So this may manifest with contralateral pain and thermal sensation abnormal in the body. You can have sympathetic involvement of your descending sympathetic tract. Okay, patient might have ipsilateral Horner syndrome, and also your fibers of your cranial nerve 9 and 10 is also affected. That's why patient may suffer from hoarseness, dysphagia, or hiccups. For olivary cerebellar, spinocerebellar, okay, so patient may manifest with vertical diplopia, okay, and illusion of tilting of vision and rotation of the vertical meridian, okay. So you can have also involvement of your descending tract of your cranial nerve 5, okay. So you can have pain, burning, and impaired sensation of the ipsilateral face. So cuneus and tractus solitarius, okay, loss of taste, but very seldom experienced by the patient. You can also have involvement of the cuneate and gracile nuclei. Okay, so you can experience numbness of the ipsilateral limbs. So medial medullary syndrome or Dejerine syndrome, this is an occlusion of your anterior spinal artery. So patient may manifest with contralateral hemiplegia, contralateral loss of position and vibratory sensation, and ipsilateral paralysis, and later atrophy of the tongue. So remember, your medullary syndrome is lateral and medial. Okay? So for lateral, more on sensation problem. And for medial, more on motor. Okay? Because the motor is located more medially in the medulla. So this is a transverse section of your upper medulla, reflecting regions supplied by the vertebral arteries and their branches. Okay? So this area is involved in your lateral medullary syndrome, and this area is involved in your medial medullary syndrome. So you can appreciate here the corticospinal tract. Here, there are a lot of structures that are affected in this area. That's why you have a lot, I think 8 to 10 structures. So let's now proceed with the basilar artery stroke syndrome. So the branches of the basilar artery are the paramedian, which is composed of 7 to 10 pairs, supplying the wedge portion of the pons on either sides. Next is the short circumferential. Okay, it supplies 5 to 7 pairs in number, supplying the lateral 2/3 at the pons and the middle and superior cerebellar peduncle. And the long circumferential, 2 on each side, which runs laterally around the pons to reach the cerebellar hemisphere. And lastly is the interpeduncular. Okay. or the interpeduncular branches, okay, supplying the basilar artery and origin of the posterior cerebral artery, supplying the high midbrain and medial subthalamic regions. So let's now proceed with the basilar artery stroke syndrome. Well, the main occlusion could be due to an occlusion of the basilar artery itself. It could be due to the both occlusion of the both vertebral artery or occlusion of a single adequate vertebral artery. Okay, so the emboli usually large at the terminal bifurcation. Okay, is what you, and the other term for this syndrome is the top of the basilar syndrome. So the clinical picture of your basilar artery occlusion is comatose, quadriplegia, and ophthalmoplegia. Okay, because your basilar artery supplies your pons, no, where you have your reticular activating system, and your corticospinal tract passes through your through your pons, no, and the different extraocular muscle located in your pontine area. So these are the different structures involved if you have a bilateral involvement. Okay. So corticospinal tract, corticobulbar, cerebellum, middle and superior cerebellar peduncle, medial and lateral lemniscus, spinothalamic tract, medial longitudinal fasciculus, pontine nuclei, vestibular and cochlear nuclei, descending hypothalamic sympathetic fibers. Well, if the occlusion occurs at the terminal bifurcation, so the clinical picture are the following. You have a transient loss of consciousness, ocular disturbances, hemianopia, bilateral ptosis, pupillary enlargement with preserved reaction to light. Well, lock-in syndrome, this is an occlusion of the mid-basilar artery. So it involves occlusion of your bilateral basis pontis or your anterior pons. So patient may have mutism, quadriplegia, obliteration of your horizontal eye movement. So the patient is paralyzed, no? The patient may only communicate through eyes, okay? But the patient remains conscious. So for superior cerebellar artery occlusion, the clinical picture are the following. You have ipsilateral cerebellar ataxia of the limbs, contralateral loss of pain and temperature sensation, ipsilateral Horner syndrome, palatal myoclonus. Okay, so these are the different branches. Okay, these are the structures. Okay, that are part of your PCA, okay, of your posterior circulation. So your occipital lobe, okay, supplied by your PCA here. This is supplied by your superior cerebellar artery, this area. So for anterior inferior cerebellar artery occlusion, so these are the clinical picture. Okay. You can have vertigo, vomiting, nystagmus, tinnitus, unilateral deafness, facial weakness, ipsilateral cerebellar ataxia, ipsilateral Horner syndrome, paralysis of conjugate lateral gaze, contralateral loss of pain and temperature. Okay. Well, this table summarizes the different stroke syndrome, okay, based on the blood vessel involved and the different signs and symptoms. Okay, so always remember your motor homunculus. Okay, so if it involves your ACA, the weakness is more prominent in the lower extremity. No? If you have an MCA occlusion, the weakness is more prominent in the upper extremity. And you can also appreciate the different syndrome, no, of your MCA. If you have a superior division, parasynovial region, inferior division, okay, and the reticular striate division. And this is a table also showing you, the different manifestation involving your posterior circulation stroke, okay, and there are different signs and symptoms, no? So it summarizes everything I have mentioned a while ago, okay, and their anatomic location and structure involved. So let's now proceed with the lacunar stroke. So the lacunar stroke, okay, so these are infarcts due to occlusion of small arteries. So the different mechanism are fibrohyalinoid arteriolar sclerosis, okay. So this is a local type of fibrohyalinoid arteriolar sclerosis involving the orifice or the proximal part of the small penetrating blood vessels. The second is your atherosclerosis of the large trunk of vessels that occludes the origin of the same small vessels. And this is prone to involve several adjacent vessels and cause at times larger lacunes. Okay. And the third one is the entry of the small embolic materials into one of the vessels. So these are the most common location of your lacunar stroke. You have the putamen, the most common, the caudate nucleus, the thalamus, the basis pontis, internal capsule, and your deep cerebral white hemisphere. Okay, so in all clinical and pathologic material, okay, there has been a strong relationship between the lacunar infarction and chronic hypertension, no? And also diabetes and hyperlipidemia. So you have different syndrome of your lacunar strokes. You can have pure motor hemiplegia, pure sensory stroke, clumsy hand dysarthria, ipsilateral hemiparesis ataxia, okay, absence of cortical deficits. Okay. So for pure motor hemiplegia, usually it involves the internal capsule and your corona radiata, and usually it involves the lenticular straight arteries. No? The lenticular straight arteries, specifically the lateral lenticular straight arteries. So patient may have pure motor hemiplegia, opposite face, arms, hands, and legs. Okay, in approximately equal measure. So you can appreciate here a hypodensity, no, over the posterior limb of the internal capsule. So for pure sensory lacunar stroke, lacunes in the lateral thalamus. Okay, because common din ang lacunar stroke in the thalamus. So it involves hemisensory defect involving the limb, face, and trunk extending to the midline. So for clumsy hand dysarthria, this stroke usually involves the paramedian pons. You can see here in the DWI, there's a hyperintensity, no? Okay, usually in the paramedian arteries. So patient may manifest with dysarthria and clumsiness of one or both hands. So for ipsilateral hemiparesis ataxia syndrome, usually lacunar infarction of the pons, midbrain, internal capsule, or the parietal white matter. There is an ipsilateral, okay, ataxic or weakness of the extremities. Okay, so we're done with the different syndrome of stroke. No? So let's proceed with the different treatment of ischemic stroke. So treatment of ischemic stroke can be divided into acute phase, no? Rehabilitation, secondary prevention, and prevention of progression of vascular disease. Okay, so remember the aim of, of management in acute setting. This is to rapid restoration of perfusion through occluded vessels. We want to try to save the penumbra. No? So how can we do that? We can manage that through intravenous thrombolysis, no? Endovascular thrombolysis or endovascular thrombectomy. Okay, so intravenous thrombolysis, we have it here in FEU. So it is a drug, no, called your tissue plasminogen activator that converts plasminogen to plasmin. Usually, it is given in stroke patient, no, when it arrives 3 to 4.5 hours post-stroke. No, this is time-bound medication. So the drug is alteplase and tenecteplase. Okay. So alteplase, so this is the standard drug. The dose is 0.9 milligram per kilogram. No, the maximum dose is 90 milligrams. So the 10% bolus, okay, should be given over 1 minute. Okay. The bolus is given 1 minute, then the remaining dose is given infusion over 1 hour. Okay. So based on different studies, there is a 6% risk of symptomatic cerebral hemorrhage. Okay, so the proposed dose of 0.6 milligram per kilogram is shown to have a inferior to the standard dose. This was done in Asian population. So for the tenecteplase, the doses of 0.25 milligram per kilogram or 0.4 milligram per kilogram have been used for thrombolysis and achieve comparable results. Okay. So comparing tenecteplase at a higher dose to alteplase showed no difference between groups in clinical outcomes and other trials. So remember when you give RTPA or alteplase, okay, so there's an inclusion and exclusion criteria. Okay, inclusion criteria, so the patient should have a diagnosis of ischemic stroke causing measurable neurological deficit, an onset of symptoms less than 3 hours, no, 3 hours and 4.5 hours beginning the treatment, and the age should be 18 years old. So anyway, the exclusion criteria are so numerous, no, but it only tells us that any form of bleeding, especially in the brain, no, this is an one of the exclusion criteria, okay, in giving this medication, okay. That's why in patient with who came in the emergency room 3 hours post-ictus, you request for an MRI because you want to exclude bleeding, okay? In order for you to administer this medication, you want to exclude intracerebral hemorrhage because hemorrhage is well delineated in your cranial CT scan. So acute surgical revascularization is an opening of an occluded carotid artery immediately after stroke. Okay. However, this technique was stopped because of poor outcomes of group who were treated with stent in comparison to medical treatment. So for anticoagulation in acute stroke, okay, so the distinction between anticoagulation to prevent the progression of acute stroke and the prophylactic use of anticoagulation for prevention of future stroke. Okay, so the use of this drug, no, is not of mostly practice, no, if the stroke is fully developed. No, you can use heparin in the setting of basilar artery occlusion if there's an impending carotid artery occlusion. However, if you have a fully developed stroke, there's no benefit, no, in using anticoagulation. In the setting of cerebral edema and increased intracranial pressure, especially in large hemispherical stroke, so this is a life-threatening complication following a massive cerebral infarction. Usually, if it involves 1/3 of the hemisphere, okay, so the clinical indicator of this one is the patient is drowsy, fixed pupils, ipsilateral Babinski sign, and changes in breathing pattern. So if you are anticipating a cerebral edema or an increase in intracranial pressure, third to fifth post-stroke day, you can make use of medical decompression in the form of mannitol. Okay, or hypertonic saline in the form of Totilac. Okay, these are the following doses. Okay, so usually this is done. Okay, if the patient has a large or massive infarction of the hemisphere. Okay. You can also request for surgical intervention. No, you can also ask for the help of our neurosurgeon, no, to perform decompressive hemorrhaginectomy. So this is a CT scan of a patient. If you try to look for the size of the infarct, it involves 1/3 of the hemisphere. So we, as a neurologist, I anticipate this infarct to become swollen in the following days. That's why the decompressive hemorrhaginectomy should be performed, in the first 2 to 3 days. Okay, so the usually it removes the skull, to accommodate the swollen brain. Okay, so this is indicated for large MCA infarction and large cerebellar infarction. So medical management after stroke. Okay, so you should admit the patient to stroke unit, so to improve the morbidity and mortality, prevention of aspiration and pneumonia, since most of our stroke patients, they have impaired swallowing, prevention of venous thrombosis in the legs, pulmonary embolism, and coronary syndrome, maintenance of sugar control. Okay, and treatment of previously unappreciated hypertension is preferably deferred, because during the initial part of stroke, initial onset of stroke, during the first days of stroke, first 2 to 3 days, we do permissive hypertension. We maintain a map of 110 to 130. Okay, so this is to prevent or to salvage the penumbra. Okay, this is to prevent the neuronal death within the penumbra. Okay, that's why we do not give antihypertensive medication during the first days of stroke, first 2 to 3 days or 5 days of stroke. Okay, so for primary and secondary prevention, can give anticoagulation. Anticoagulation is indicated for patients with atrial fibrillation, aspirin, for patient with non-cardioembolic stroke or patient with for patient with normal cardiac rhythm, okay, or patient with low CHAD score, warfarin, this is given in patient with atrial fibrillation in the setting of a valvular problem. Okay, the initial dose is 5 to 10 milligrams daily, and the target INR is 2 to 3. Okay, so you should recheck for INR once a day for 5 days, or 2 to 3 times a week for 1 to 2 weeks, and finally once every several weeks. Okay, so there's an increased bleeding risk in the following medication: aspirin, cholestyramine, alcohol, carbamazepine, cephalosporin, quinolone, sulfa drugs, high dose of penicillin, okay, and hemorrhagic skin necrosis. Well, your factor 10A inhibitors in the form of apixaban and dabigatran and rivaroxaban, these are anticoagulants. You can give these drugs. This is much safer, with reduced monitoring of your INR, but you can only give this in patients with non-valvular atrial fibrillation. So this provides similar reduction of stroke recurrence compared to warfarin. So they do not require regular INR monitoring. Okay, so indicated in patients with new onset atrial fibrillation without valvular problem, and attempts should be made to restore normal sinus rhythm. In the setting of bacterial endocarditis, you should not give immediately an anticoagulation. You should treat, First, the infection with antibiotics. So aspirin has proved to be the most consistently useful drug in prevention of thrombotic stroke. No? So in the form of your other drugs such as your clopidogrel, clopidogrel are considered if aspirin is not tolerated by your patient. Well, in patient with who suffered from stroke, they are required to be given with statins. Your Sparkle trial demonstrated a high dose of statins reduces the incidence of subsequent stroke after TIA or first stroke by 2% over 5 years. And the target ADLs is less than 70. So how about closure of your patent foramen ovale in patient with paradoxical embolism? So the role of the patent foramen ovale as a cause of stroke has been pointed to a contention. So in order for you to establish this diagnosis, you should perform a 2D echo or transesophageal echocardiography. Okay. So this is a scoring system to prevent the stroke risk in a patient with PFO. Okay. So how about course and prognosis of ischemic stroke? So there are no rules have been yet formulated that allow prediction of early or late course of stroke. So the most frequent cause of death after acute phase is heart disease and pneumonia. So these are complications. If coma or stupor is present from the beginning, survival is largely determined by success in keeping the airway clear, preventing aspiration pneumonia, controlling brain swelling, and maintaining the fluid and electrolyte balance. So if the clinical recovery does not begin 1 to 2 weeks, the outlook is poorer for both motor and language function, and the remaining deficit after 5 to 6 months will become permanent. I always say that to my patient, So whatever the state of the patient after 6 months, it may be permanent. Okay. Hemianopia, usually permanent if not cleared in a few weeks. Dysphagia, 8 weeks or longer in a medullary infarcts. Okay. Aphasia, dysarthria, cerebellar ataxia, and walking may improve for years or longer with the use of rehabilitation. Of course, after the acute phase, you should refer the patient to rehab. So prognosis of neurological deficits. So seizures seen in 10% of embolic cortical infarcts or post-stroke seizure. So patient with stroke, usually their EEG does not EEG does not normalize. So dementia is seen when multiple infarcts occurs over time, usually bilateral infarcts involving right and left hemisphere. Okay, and Binswanger subcortical leukoencephalopathy. Okay. So these are my sources of my lecture. If you have any question, please ask your proctors. Thank you very much and stay safe.